Hello, Year Nines. This is Mrs. Watson. Yesterday we had a look at genres of speeches, and you ended the lesson by completing a table. In today's lesson, I would like for you to please turn to page 11 of 22 in your workbooks. We're going to be having a look at elements of speeches. Okay, so that means we're halfway through the workbook, which is awesome. I've paced the lessons quite nicely so that you've got time to complete all your activities at your own pace and upload it to the cool activities section at the end of the week. So in the event that you do find yourself a little bit behind, there's plenty of time to catch up on the activities in the workbook for the rest of the week. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about elements of speeches. And in the introductory section, you were asked to state why a speech you had chosen to watch was good or bad. So remember, I asked you to have a look at the greatest speeches of all time, list 5 of them, watch one of them, and then explain why you thought that the speech was good or bad. So in that section, you would have naturally identified some of the elements that we're going to be talking about. But in this section, we'll be learning more about the elements of a good speech. So firstly, let's have a look at matter. When preparing the matter for a persuasive speech, the golden rule is quality, not quantity. In other words, less is more. A brief and simple message has the dramatic and persuasive appeal that a long-winded, rambling discourse does not. You want simply to deliver a clear and expressive message. Okay. Number 2. Rhetorical techniques. There are several stylistic devices we can use for dramatic and persuasive effect. Okay, the first of these is emotive language. You should already be familiar with emotive language because it is something that we discuss and we teach you year on year in English. But let's just have a little bit of a recap of what emotive language is all about. As the name implies, emotive, emotions, it's words that appeal to the listener's emotions rather than to their powers of reason and logic. Okay? These are sometimes called loaded words as they contain a message that is subtly telling the listener what to think or believe. So if you've ever read an article, listened to a speech, or watched an advertisement, and it's made you feel a certain way, chances are they've used emotive language to try and convince you to think or believe something. So the example I have included in this booklet is the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr., which was written during the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And the emotive language is highlighted in bold red font. Some of the emotive language is highlighted in bold red font, and I'll explain as I go through it why it's emotive. So some of you actually are very familiar with this speech because when I asked on the forum what some of your favorite speeches are, some of you said this particular speech. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. So can you see there, starting the speech with I have a dream. A dream implies a desire for something you can envision, something you can picture. And starting the speech with that makes us envision and desire what comes next in the speech. Okay. Another bit of emotive language is the word brotherhood. So everyone wants to belong to a brotherhood, a community of people that look out for each other. So we all just want to be equal and, liked and taken care of, and that word brotherhood just gives us that image of that feeling. Okay, I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, the heat and sweltering just gives you that idea that it is very uncomfortable. It is so hot and uncomfortable. You just don't want that. Okay? You just don't want that injustice. With the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. So if you can imagine the heat of injustice in a desert where there seems to be no hope, and then in the distance you see this oasis, a beautiful palm tree, some water, cool shady spot. So in the middle of this heat of injustice, you can see the hope of an oasis of freedom and justice. So it makes you feel like that is something you want as well. Okay, you absolutely believe in the dream and you want it as well. Okay. So you can either pause this video at this point and type in your text box. So I'll just quickly show you how to do that. Some of you have had some trouble typing your text book. So in the text box below, write one or two sentences using emotive language to try and convince the Australians to download the COVID Safe app. Okay, so click in the text box and write your answers in there. Okay, like that. Or you can do that after this video. Okay, next we're having a look at rhetorical questions. So a rhetorical question is one put by a speaker for effect, not to draw an answer. Okay, so an example is, who would believe such nonsense? Who would believe such nonsense is actually just another way of saying that is ridiculous. But who would believe such nonsense is a little bit more effective because it implies that no one would believe that. Why would you believe that? The speaker is engaging the listener using the rhetorical question. Okay, the next one, balance. This is one of my favorites in a speech. So I quite enjoy balance. So it's rhythmically balanced phrases and sentences that appeal to the ear. So they sound really good when you hear them. They can have a hypnotic effect, persuading listeners to accept what is being said. So, for example, Mark Antony says, I came to bury Caesar, not to praise him. John F. Kennedy says, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. So can you see there's that balance, there's that connection between the two parts of the sentence. And then Hitler, faith is harder to shake than knowledge. Love is less subject to change than respect. And hatred is more lasting than dislike. Okay, the next one you should also be familiar with is repetition. So similar to the balance effect mentioned above, this has a cumulative convincing effect. So cumulative means it adds up over time as you're speaking. The words add on to the previous thought. Okay, so we shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. So that, can you see that we shall fight is repetition and has this building effect as Winston Churchill is speaking, so that you can really picture they mean business. Okay. In the text box below, write a few sentences using repetition to try and convince your peers that skate parks are safe to reopen during the COVID-19 epidemic. Okay, so use the Winston Churchill example above and write your own few sentences using repetition to try and convince some of your peers who may not believe that skate parks are safe to open that they in fact are safe to reopen during the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, you can either pause this video and do that now, or you can come back to it after the video. Okay, the next element is the crescendo effect or the climax of the speech. Okay, so it's using a sentence that rhythmically and cumulatively builds up to a climax, is dramatic and therefore convincing. This device is often used in the final sentence of an address to leave a lasting impression. Okay, so there's no example here, but it's basically, it's a quick summary of your speech, something that you want the listeners to go away remembering. So even if they forget the whole rest of the speech, that you want them to remember the climax. So the one that rhythmically and cumulatively builds up to a climax and is dramatic and therefore convincing. So it's the device is often used in the final sentence of an address to leave a lasting impression. Okay. Then we have the three effect. For some reason, three balanced phrases or three strong emotive or alliterative words have a particular dramatic impact. So, for example, where Julius Caesar says, "I came, I saw, I conquered." And I think that's quite often quoted. So it is very memorable in the minds of even people who weren't around in his day. Abraham Lincoln's "of the people, by the people, for the people." Another quite memorable statement. And then Winston Churchill again, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." So much owed by so many to so few. Can you see that play on words, that three effect in those examples? Okay, ambiguity is a definite no-no in informative writing. So I think we covered that when we looked at basic types of speeches. So clarity and precision are mandatory in informative writing. So you don't want to be ambiguous. You don't want to be unclear. Ambiguous is another way of saying unclear, okay? In creative writing, ambiguity adds a richness and dimension of an infinite possibility to meaning, okay? So when you're wanting to be creative, you can absolutely use ambiguity. Ambiguity can be constructed by the contradictory meanings in oxymorons, paradoxes, complex sentences, and contrary phrases. Okay, I'm going to not explain each of those to you. We've done them already in Year 9 English, but I'm going to ask that you go and have a look, research each of those oxymorons, paradoxes, complex sentences, and contrary phrases, and write down those definitions in your learning journals again to recap those concepts that we've studied earlier in the year. Creative construction of grammar and words with multiple meanings help to create multifaceted messages. Multifaceted messages means messages that say one thing but mean another or imply something, and they are, having you feel and understand things on very many levels. Okay? Okay, next we have alliteration and assonance. An excellent device is the repetition of consonants or vowels at the beginning of two or more words. For example, radical ratbags, and unloved, unlovable, and unlovely. This is alliteration. Where the internal vowel in two or more words has a similar sound, we have assonance. So for example, this bumbling, stumbling, lumbering idiot. Okay? So another activity for you is to pause this video and in the text box below write your own examples of alliteration and assonance. Okay, or you might choose to do that after the video. Okay, and lastly, we look at poetic devices. So other poetic devices such as imagery, you should be familiar with. Metaphor, you should be familiar with. Simile and personification can also be used where suitable to add life and color to what is being said. Okay, I might just try and have a look for an example of the crescendo, the climax, and the ambiguity for you. And I'll post that to the lesson a little bit later today. Okay, so a huge tip for you for when you come to write your speech later in the term, try not to get too carried away by the above devices. Yes, you need to use them. They are tricks of the oral trade, but make sure that as a base, you have a solid underlying argument which is logically developed and supported, okay? And then you can add some of those devices that we've spoken about, okay? But the main thing is that you've got something to say and you've logically developed and supported your writing. Your next activity is to use some of the elements that we've learned about in this lesson and write a powerful excerpt of a speech, urging people to vote for you in an upcoming election for class president. Okay, so you're really wanting to stir some emotions of your classmates and have them vote for you in an upcoming election. So use a few of these elements and write a powerful excerpt of a speech urging people to vote for you in an upcoming election for class president. Okay, and now that we have identified the elements of a good speech, we're going to consider some of the criteria used for assessing speeches. These criteria will be used to assess your speech later in the term, so it is really important that you understand what each of them means. Therefore, as your final activity for today, you need to look up the definition of each of these criteria and type them into the text box. Okay, so fluency, clarity, enunciation, modulation of pace, modulation of tone, modulation of volume, expression, inflection, and pitch. Okay, so those 9 elements are really important, and that is the criteria we will use when we come to assess your speech later in the term. I hope I've helped you understand the elements of speeches a little bit better. If you need to ask questions, please feel free to post your questions to the forum or direct message your teachers. You will probably get to understand these elements a bit better when you go to do the activities in your workbook, and you get to practice some of the elements. As I mentioned, I will find a really good, I couldn't think of one off the top of my head for ambiguity and the crescendo elements, because I'm feeling very tired at the moment. It's late at night, but I will find some examples for you and I will post them to the lesson. As I said, any questions at any time, please let your teachers know, and we will answer those for you. Okay, in the next few lessons, we're going to be looking at the elements of a eulogy, how to write a good eulogy, and also how to write a good wedding speech. Okay, then from next week, we'll get into some more interesting stuff, looking at persuasive techniques and comparing some actual speeches and things like that. Okay, year 9s. So thank you for listening. As I said, I hope this helped a little bit. But if you are still unclear on some concepts, then obviously just let us know. Okay, have an amazing day. Enjoy your learning, and I look forward to seeing you or speaking to you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.